Okay, so we are on. I'm in with Kurt. We're going to be going over chapter 3 today. It is the 17th of June, 2019, and we're going to be looking at some of these hands-on activities. Chapter 3 is all about really delving in and becoming more familiar with Windows Server. So in the first two chapters, the first chapter we're just sort of familiarizing ourselves with how to navigate, that type of thing. Then the second chapter looks at, to some degree, it looks at roles and doing a little bit more, but this is where we really delve into Windows Server Manager, bit related to that. This activity 3-1, there's no screenshot for it, no file submission for it, but it is definitely one you want to be doing to get yourself familiar with that. So we'll take a look. Basically, you're just going to be opening Server Manager. Oops, there we go. Jump into my server here real quick. So it's pretty easy to get to. When you boot it up for the first time, it's usually going to pop up right off the bat there, but if it doesn't come up, or if you've already been signed in and you closed out, you just click on Start. It's going to be right in the Start menu there, Server Manager. You can find it under, I believe, Administrative Tools. No, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, it's just right in the main under S in the main Start menu area there. So this has us take a look and just basically explore around Server Manager a little bit.
So those two boxes that are in red, there's something wrong with them, right?
Well, that would indicate that there's something that needs to be, there's something that needs to be looked at, and so
okay.
It doesn't always necessarily mean that there's something wrong. It could just be that, in this case, a service has stopped for some reason, and what those services are could vary, and whether or not that's something that you need to handle or deal with could vary. So,
okay.
Now with Windows Server in Server Manager, this is kind of neat. This is something that's new to Server 2012 and newer. Server Manager gives you a picture of your overall domain. So if you have multiple domain controllers on your network, Server Manager will show you information from different ones. So like we see our local server here, but we also see this all servers. So if we have more servers, we can add them, more servers in our domain, doing different things. We can add them into this list and control them from a single place, which makes administration a little bit simpler. So you can do a remote administration on your different servers, which is pretty handy. So that's something that's pretty neat about Server Manager. There's also, over here you're going to have, your list of several different things here. First of all, the dashboard. This is just your main starting area. This is where you'll go to add new roles and features and whatnot. You can create server groups here. This is where you would have your servers added here. You can connect to cloud services, which Microsoft is really pushing these days through their Azure services. So cloud services is something that's becoming more of an important element of network administration. Also here, when you install over here in this little pane right here, you have your dashboard. You can look at things to do with your local server. You can look at things to do with all servers in your domain. And it adds little bits of information about the various roles that you might have installed. So obviously, we've talked about how file and storage services is installed by default.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look at some basics here, and you can even do some basic changes. But this is mostly just an overview to give you an idea of what's actually happening, right? In terms of your file server. Now, you can make, like I say, you can make some changes here, but typically you would use an administrative tool, and this is something that we'll look at later. some things don't have an administrative tool component, but anyway, this is one of these examples of things that won't. But if you create a share, it'll show up in your server manager dashboard there. So let's go ahead and just create a new folder, call it share. This is something you'll do later in the class, but we're just going to quickly share this folder and watch how it shows up in that server manager so that you can see it. I'm not going to do any special permissions or anything. We're just going to do a basic file share. So when you go into volumes, you should see where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Maybe it's under. Okay, it's. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the file and storage services server manager system exactly. I know there is a way to look at shares, and I know there's a lab related to that. I'll wait on looking at that for the lab, but in the meantime, that's just some basics of what that does. Now, DHCP will also give you some information as well. So this is something that I installed that not everybody has installed at this point, but it's just going to give you some basic information where in order to actually configure DHCP, you're going to go into an administrative tool. You're going to find DHCP, which this will show up after you install it. Install that role, and this is where you'd actually do your configuration. Now, this is going to tell you, okay, you know, there's DHCP server services running. That's good. That's important. That needs to be running in order for this to function. It's going to give you some analysis, so best practice analyzer. That's I haven't made any configuration changes in my DHCP, so there's nothing showing up in there yet. And then it shows, you know, the role is enabled, the DHCP server role, and we see how much CPU usage, the performance, CPU usage and memory usage that DHCP is actually taking up. Which, because I haven't done anything with it, and obviously I'm not using this as a legitimate server, it's taking up none. But that is a handy thing about Server Manager. So it is kind of your go-to place pre-configuration. When you're doing your configurations, you'll go into the actual role that you've installed. So for instance, DHCP, you're going to go into the DHCP administrative tool. But in Server Manager, you can look at some basic information. This is kind of a go-to if you're troubleshooting or if you're trying to add new things.
So the dashboard's an overview of what's going on.
Dashboard's a very general overview, and then you can go into you'll see, you know, I've got roles and server groups here. So we've got roles here, we've got our local server, and then we've got our all servers server group. You can create new ones. So the all servers is going to say anybody that's on the domain, but you can say domain controllers. So say you have a few servers that are functioning as domain controllers. You know, one's like a RODC, read-only domain controller, and one's the actual domain controller. You could throw those into a group and be monitoring those two servers from here. So that's a handy little utility. Now, we don't do that in this particular class. You'll look at this in a lot more depth if you take other Windows Server classes. So that's the gist of the first lab. I don't think there's much to that other than just playing around, looking around at stuff. And then you jump into 3-2, which is installing and removing, a server role, which I'm going to pull that down, and then there we go. So the role it has you install is print and document services, but the basic way to do that, there's a couple ways to start the process. Obviously right here in configure local server, you've got add roles and features. You can also come over here to manage and click add roles and features. And then later when you go to remove it, you have to come over here to remove roles and features. Okay, so if you for instance have print and document services on here, you decide later on you want to remove it, that's where you would go. And in fact, the lab has you do that. So you go through. This process is basically something you don't really need to read through the whole thing once you've kind of familiarized yourself with it. Now, there are certain things require certain criteria. So different roles are going to specify, you need to have this thing done first in order to do this role. So for instance, in order to promote your server to a domain controller and install Active Directory and everything else there, you have to first set a static IP address. And so you'll see, you know, network settings such as this static IP address are configured. So you need to be thinking about that before you install new roles. Same thing with DHCP. DHCP is another one where you would have to have a static IP address. So if you're running a DHCP server, it stands to reason that server needs a static IP in order to hand out IPs to computers down the way.
Would you do so with the DHCP? Would give it you your IP address, and then you'd go in and make it permanent or not? You know.
Well, you know how we did that thing in the very first chapter where we come into Network and Sharing Center and we take a look at Ethernet 0, and we come into Properties, TCP/IP version 4,
yeah,
and we set this here. When it's set to obtain an IP address automatically, that means it's going to request one from a DHCP server. Now,
and then the DHCP server would fill in all that stuff, the IP address, subnet. Okay, then what do? You write it down and then change it to static and make it permanent?
Well, you don't. In terms of your IP subnet, that's going to be determined when you're building your network infrastructure in the first place. Okay. So depending on how you decide to build that subnet, in this case, we're using. Have you taken CNT100 and 115?
Yeah, we did subnetting and okay. the whole shebang.
So this makes it a little bit more practical. This breaks it down. It's good that you're asking this because I want you to understand this. The practical aspect of subnetting is not just, okay, you know, how do you figure out, you know, what host or what subnet this host belongs to. That's great for answering questions, but the practical aspect of subnetting is determining, okay, I have this many hosts. I have this many devices on my network. How many hosts am I going to need in my subnet? And most of the time you can get away with just using default. So in this case, we're using, you notice 192. If you think about classful addressing, that's a class C address, right? And so we're using the default class C subnet mask. So that would indicate that we have 254 hosts. So when you're developing your, in this subnet, so when you're developing your subnet, you're deciding that in advance prior to setting up any kind of servers, any kind of routers, anything else like that. So if you're building a network from scratch, this is something you decide first, okay? And so you're going to decide, okay, my domain controller is going to have this IP address, you know, and so you might get an IP address, you know, by default out of the box. If you just installed Windows Server, it's going to have this box checked, but it's not a good idea to leave that checked because most things that you do on a server are going to warrant having a static IP. So for instance, if you're going to promote that server to a domain controller, you need to have a static IP for that to work. Mm-hmm. If you're going to use it for DHCP, there must be a static IP address in place for that to work. Okay, and so a lot of the time, you're not going to leave this box checked. You're going to go in here and you're going to say, use the following IP address and set a static IP address.
Okay.
Okay. And so now, if you do install the DHCP role on your server is going to be the device that's actually handing out to other computers IP addresses on your network.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
And it will know that the static ones cannot be used.
Yeah, exactly okay. Right. And so you can also create reservations. That's something that you look at in later chapters. I'm not sure exactly which chapter looks at DHCP off the top of my head.
They covered that in CNT115 or whatever. Something like
okay,
that.
Yeah. So this class will actually cover it practically. So you'll go in and install the DHCP role on here. 100 and 115 cover it more generally. This class brings it to a practical reality, right? Okay. Where you create an IP address scope and you set all the different settings, and then it hands out IP addresses on your network.
Okay.
And so that brings sort of the theoretical, the hypothetical in CNT 100 and 115 into practical. Okay, how do you actually do this? You know, if you're a network administrator, how do you do it, right? Mm-hmm. And so this makes it a little bit more practical, I think. All right. And so that's something that's one of many roles that would require having a static IP address. So there's several things that it just lets you know here on this first page before you begin. It lets you know that you might need to do this. Okay. Now, there are two different ways to install roles, and that is role-based or feature-based installation. This is just installing a single role for your server, the one that you're working on right here.
Okay.
Now, if you're doing remote desktop services, this is where you would install the roles required for VDI. Essentially, you've heard the term thick client and thin client, I think. Yes? Maybe?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. This is how you would set up a thick client. Okay. And so if you're setting up your server to operate as a VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure server, okay, where you have virtual machine systems where your thin clients are accessing a VM on a server, this is where you would set that. So there's only one time that you would have one situation, one scenario where you would use remote desktop services installation, and that's where you're making a thick client. Okay. In every other case, you're going to do role-based and feature-based installation. Okay. And so we'll click through that. So basically, you can just next right through these first few steps. We're not doing it on a remote server, so we're not installing this on another server within our domain. But you can, which is really cool. So if you add other servers to your domain and put them into your management pool, then you can select another server on your network that you can then install roles onto, which is pretty nice. So meaning you can manage all your servers from one single server interface. That's a pretty cool feature that's been added to Windows Server 2012 and incorporated again into Server 2016. That wasn't around back in 2008 and 2011 and 2003. So that's pretty handy. So this is where you'll select print and document services here. Most roles, that's something I just clicked right through, but you guys should take note of. Most roles are going to include a number of features as well. Okay, so it's going to ask you when you select the role itself, it's going to ask you, do you want to include these features that are required for this role to function? And the answer is most definitely yes, because you have to. You don't really have a choice. Okay, and you can do multiple roles at the same time, but typically you'll only do one at a time because.
So when you selected print and document services, it automatically checked the DHCP server installed.
No, that was already done.
Okay. Okay, that was before. All right.
Yeah, that was just me demonstrating installing a role back in Chapter 2. But this is actually where you do the lab, and you would do install print and document services.
So some of these
file and storage services is already installed, at least the basics of it.
Okay. Okay.
All right, and then you'll go through the features page. This is going to automatically check things that are required in order for your role to work. Okay. Mm-hmm. A couple of things will automatically just check off in there. Now you can also do other things. There's a lot of stuff in the features window. I'm not going to delve into this too much, but because there's so much, this is in terms of this class, you don't deal with features. You only deal with the features that are required in order for your roles to work. Because there's so much, we're not delving into this at all. I'm not going to worry about this. You guys will get more of this in future classes.
Okay.
So we'll click next to the features. Now it's going to give you the basic description of print and document services, whatever roles you're adding. So if you're adding a bunch, it's going to give you a list of all the roles over here in this pane right here. It's going to give you everything and just show you what you're doing and kind of give you a description there. Now it's going to ask you what services you'd like to add. I believe that it just has you leave print server selected in this, but basically print server is going to allow you to use this as a hardware, well, I guess it's technically considered a software print server. Basically, in a domain environment, you might have 30 or 40 printers, and you want to install them automatically for users that are in your domain. This print services would allow you to do that in a simplified manner. So you could install all the printers on your server and then allow them to automatically install for any users that join in, which is a really handy thing when you're in a domain. If you have hundreds of users, you don't necessarily want to go to all of those computers and install the printers manually. So it makes it really simple using a role like print and document services. Now, distributed scan server would allow users to scan. It would allow them to scan to the server as a scan server. This isn't something that you see very often, but it's used more often in a sharing sense. So you usually would use shares instead of using a scan server to do this. So you would use file and storage services rather than print services to do this. But it sort of depends on how you're setting things up. Internet printing would allow IPP, which is something that's necessary a lot of the time for Apple devices. Apple devices will use internet printing protocol very often. Also, if you're trying to use Google Cloud Print, but you don't have a Cloud Print printer that's got that built in, you can use internet printing to allow devices to be added via the cloud. So that's basically what that's for. But a lot of Apple devices require that. An LPD, this would be for Unix-based systems, including Apple as well as Linux systems. So you'd only install those in the case where you're using Apple or Linux, or in the case internet printing, you would use that in the case of like Google Cloud Print. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things. In this case, we're just leaving print server checked. Now, it's a good idea to not check this box when you're running a live server. It's just not smart to reboot without any kind of warning. It's usually better to wait until the end of the day when everybody's off and backups have completed. So I don't recommend using that checkbox, and I believe it tells you not to. Most roles and features, back in the day, when I first was taking Windows Server classes and playing around with Windows Server, we used Server 2003, and pretty much every service mandated a reboot, or every role that you install mandated a reboot. That's kind of gone away. You don't really have to do it very often anymore. So most roles can be added without a reboot. So let's see if print and document services is one of them. I believe it is, but I'm not positive. So the point of this lab isn't necessarily to teach you too much about print and document services itself. It's more to teach you about adding roles in general and being able to remove them as well. So
okay.
So once this installs, all right, installation completed. Excellent. Now we see that it's finished. It gives you this little flag. If there's any kind of post-deployment tasks required, which a lot of roles will ask you to do something additional in order to use it after you finish. So for instance, if you install Active Directory, domain services, it will tell you, okay, Active Directory is installed, but now you need to promote your server to a domain controller. Okay, and that's something you'll see later. So this little flag will come up with a warning message to say, hey, if you want to finish this, you gotta do some additional work. Okay, you're not quite done yet. And so in this case, there is no additional work. The role installed just fine, and it's ready to use. Okay, but we're gonna actually just go ahead and take it right back off. So we're gonna now go to remove. Okay, it's gonna say before you begin, decide if you want to save or delete. It gives you the basic, like, hey, make sure you're taking into consideration what you're doing. You can check this box if you want to. A lot of techs do, but I don't care. It's so quick to get through it. Again, we're doing it on our local server, so we're not going to uncheck anything else. Now we're just going to go ahead and uncheck this box here, and we're going to remove the features as well. Now you notice the box is unchecked instead of checked. Okay. We're going to click through, click next again, and of course it gives us the option to restart the server. We just click remove, and then it does the exact opposite of what it just did. So it's now taking the role off the server. Okay. And so that's the gist of adding a role and removing a role. It's very simple. The difficulty comes in, the challenge comes in, excuse me, I'm getting text messages. Anyways, so the difficulty comes in when you start configuring things. So this part is really simple. And I think really everything that we do in this class is simple when you break it down, but essentially that's it for adding roles and removing them. So now we look at startup and recovery, which is a really important element of using Windows Server, is making sure that you have a decent understanding of how to fix it when it breaks. You can't be too okay. So this is going to tell us the removal succeeded now. Yep. So we told us the installation succeeded, and now it tells us the removal succeeded. Okay, so we're going to go to the recovery menu for Windows Server. I don't believe there's any screenshots for this. Oh, actually, we're not actually going to go into recovery. This one does have a screenshot. I stand corrected. So yeah, this one you'll turn in a screenshot after step 5.
Okay.
But first things first, we need to go to the control panel, which should be under, let's see, Windows Administrative Tools. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, it's probably in accessories. I usually just search anymore. Because control panel is being pushed out more and more in Windows 10, they're kind of doing the same thing in Windows Server. I anticipate that by within the next 2 years, probably by 2021, control panel won't even be used anymore. They'll have moved everything over to settings, which is unfortunate because settings is a little bit more of a challenge to navigate, but the search feature in settings is easier to use. So
that's funny because I have 8.1. In order to have control, it's easy just to go into settings and control panels in the list.
Control panels in the list on settings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. My experience with 8.1 is about 5 minutes, and then I put Windows 10 on instead.
I went from 8.1 to 10, and 10 crashed and screwed up my computer, and I had to reinstall 8.1.
Oh, geez. Well, there you go. Okay, so it just brings us right into the system window, and then advanced system settings here. Then we go into startup and recovery settings. Now, this is where you'll take your screenshot in essence, but it has you, I believe, make a couple of changes. It has you change this down from 30 seconds to 20 seconds. Now, I guess the purpose of that is to increase or decrease the amount of time it takes for the system to boot.
Yes.
I'm not sure the exact
just
point.
A list of operating systems.
No,
it's just the delay.
This just essentially is going to be a few things that you can adjust in order for the purposes of debugging and troubleshooting Windows if it breaks. Now, how much of this is stuff that you'll actually do on a regular basis? I think very minimal, but it is a good idea to be aware of the presence of this startup and recovery. Now, what you're changing here is Windows Boot Manager, which in newer operating systems, Windows Boot Manager is how they boot up. With the old system of booting, which is now referred to as legacy, which legacy is contrasted with UEFI boot. The old system of booting, the boot manager was controlled essentially by a certain special partition on the hard drive. Now it's controlled by Windows itself. And so with Windows Boot Manager, you can because it's controlled by Windows, you can make the changes to a default operating system within Windows. So if you have multiple operating systems on the same drive, you can tell it, okay, I want it to boot to this one first. So for instance, if we had Windows 10 installed on the same partition, we could tell it to boot to Windows 10 first, just right here. So this is something that's essentially adjusting Windows Boot Manager. So if you have multiple operating systems installed, there's going to give you a list of operating systems. You can control how long it gives you a chance to select those. That's what this is saying. Time to display recovery options when needed. This is pretty handy to check this box. I think this is probably more handy than the one here, so why they focus on this one in this lab is kind of beyond me. But just to point this out, this right here, if your system crashes, it's going to give you recovery options, okay? The nice thing about this is you can tell it to display those options for a certain amount of time. Whereas if you don't specify that time, then it's just going to try to reboot your system. Now, eventually, it'll give you a list of recovery options. If it crashes, 3 times in a row on boot up, it's going to then give you recovery options. What this does is it allows you recovery options right away if a crash occurs. So that's kind of nice. So there's times where you need to get in there and you're having trouble getting in. The other way to get that list is just by pressing F8. If you're familiar at all with Windows, F8 is sort of the key that you hit to get recovery options. Recovery options would be things like safe mode, the Windows Recovery Manager or Recovery Menu, and system failure. This gives you a little bit of stuff that you can do. So if a system failure happens, it's automatically going to try and reboot Windows. You can turn that off. That can be beneficial in some situations, but typically you would just leave that checked. And then this tells you where it's going to stick a memory dump if a blue screen occurs. Okay? All right. So that's basically all we do with that. You're going to take a screenshot there. And then I think the next lab, the next lab is configuring power options, which is also in the control panel. I believe it's under system. Power options, system and security, power options. So the few things that you're going to take a look at, there's quite a bit in power options. I believe that this has you take a look at creating a custom plan, which is kind of a cool thing. So we can here we go. Create a power plan. So you can start from an existing power plan. So the 3 power plans that you have are balanced. That's where it balances performance and power savings. That's going to be the default for Windows. Power saver is going to say it reduces as much energy consumption as possible. Not recommended for a server, okay? Because you want your servers functioning at as high performance as possible. Balanced is usually fine, but if you want to really kick it into high gear and get the best usage out of your server, high performance is a good way to do that. Now, if you're interested in creating a custom plan, there's quite a bit of stuff you can do there. I'm just going to leave that the same. So first of all, you set when to turn off the display. Of course, this is just a matter of blanking out the screen. It doesn't do anything else other than that. All processes are still running. RAM is still doing its thing. The CPU is still calculating. All that's still happening. So that's something really important on a server. You don't want to put the computer to sleep when it's a server, like ever. There's no situation I can think of where you would have a server and you want it going to sleep after an idle period, even 5 hours or so. You know what I mean? Because the headache of that is kind of an issue. But sleep mode is essentially sleep mode is a low power consumption state where memory is not being utilized. Essentially, all the data has been pulled from RAM and stored onto the hard drive, so that when you when you put power back into the motherboard and you boot the thing up again, it's going to take that state that the computer was in, the memory state that the computer was in, put it back into RAM, right? And so whatever you were running when it went to sleep, it's going to have it in exactly that same way. So that's what sleep mode is in essence, and there's never an issue or never a situation where you want to do that.
That's the page file, right?
I'm sorry?
That's the page file, right?
No, the page file is a supplement to RAM.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so when you're running more, when you're running a program that requires more RAM than you have available to you, for instance, your operating system is generally going to take up somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1 to 2 gig of RAM. If you only have 4 gig of RAM and your operating system is taking up half of that or more, then you run a program that requires another 3 gig of RAM. It's not going to run in the RAM. It's going to take some of that and put it into the page file, some of the less important stuff, and put it into the page file in a temporary way. And it can still pull from that, but it's much slower. So it's a better idea. A lot of times, you know, there's a common question on like the A+ and things like that. Why would you what are some reasons why you would upgrade your hard drive? And some people say, oh, if you want a bigger page file. Why would you upgrade your hard drive for a bigger page file? Wouldn't you just upgrade your RAM? So you don't need the page file as much. You don't need to throw things in there as much. So that's what the page file is for. It's for supplementing RAM for your computer when it's running live.
Okay.
Okay, so now we can customize the plan with some advanced power options here. There's quite a bit here. It has you look into some of this. Essentially, you can tweak this thing down to a very finite level of tweaking. You know, you can change what the power button does. If you press the power button rather than shutting down, you can say turn off the display when you press the power button. Stuff like that. So there's quite a bit of tweaking you can do with a power plan, but it sort of is going to be up to you to figure out what all those settings are. There's quite a few settings in there, and it has you play with a few of them. I don't often play with my power plans. I just pick from one of the 3 defaults typically. So, and usually I leave it alone. I leave it on balance. That's usually fine. If you really want to jump up the performance a little extra, get that little extra boost out of your computer, the little extra capability out of your computer, setting a power plan to high performance is not a bad idea. Okay, so that's that lab. The last lab takes a look at PowerShell. We've already looked a little bit at PowerShell, but now we're going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into it. And I'm going to leave this one to you. PowerShell, because the commands in PowerShell are sort of something that you have to develop in terms of your understanding of.
I like playing with it.
I agree. That's where you're gonna learn. If you play around with PowerShell, of course, PowerShell is very handy if you can really learn it. Now, for this class, I think it's good to wet your whistle with it. You're not going to get the depth of PowerShell that you will get with other classes in Windows Server.
So PowerShell trains you when you don't have a GUI. You basically focus on just the command lines?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. So PowerShell is all commands.
So it's important to...
But every single thing that you can do in Windows Server GUI,
yeah,
you can do in PowerShell.
So it's important to know PowerShell in case you don't have a GUI.
Yes. So if you're using like the core version of Windows Server, because you might get a job, you might have somebody hire you. They say, oh yeah, we need a server administrator, and they've paid for Server Core or they've installed Server Core, and they throw you into the wolves and say, okay, good luck. And if you don't know anything about PowerShell, you're really going to be in a world of hurt. Now, that being said, personally, you know, I'm one of those guys that doesn't know anything about PowerShell. I didn't take the time to learn it, but I've gotten away with, you know, never really having to use it much in my career. I've avoided it. I like the GUI personally. When it comes to things like Cisco iOS, I'm all about commands. I'm all about command line. I'm all about really figuring it out, delving into that. But when it came to Windows and learning Windows commands and really getting my head around that, especially PowerShell, because PowerShell has so much it can do. It is so versatile. It's so multifaceted. I personally just never delved into it. So I highly encourage you, read through these labs, read through some of the material on it, because it'll help you a lot. I've been reading through, figuring out new stuff, but it works a lot like the Linux command line. So if you get your head around this and you are in a situation where you need to know Linux, you're going to translate it a lot better than if you hadn't done any PowerShell stuff. So our Linux class is all command line based. So when you do Linux Plus, it's all 100% command line. It's 100% command line server administration. So Linux server administration through command line purely. Okay, and so PowerShell will really help you to develop that sort of mindset of how to deal with a command line operating system. Okay, which I'm not a total hater. I don't hate it. I just never delved in. I never really got my head around it too much because I've gotten away with not. So you can't, at this point, you cannot pass your MCSE without at least basic PowerShell understanding. So if you're planning on taking Microsoft certifications, you have to have PowerShell.
Got it.
So you can't get away with it anymore. Back in my day, it was totally something you could get away with because it was so new. PowerShell was being brand new, introduced in Windows Server 2008, which I started when it was Windows Server 2003 being taught pretty much strictly.
So it's going to become bare bones necessity shortly.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to need it for everything. There's going to be some things, in fact, I hear that down the road, especially in like Server 2019, which I haven't gotten any new material on it. I've just played around with it myself. But I know that in Server 2019, they're really trying to push doing all role adding and feature adding through PowerShell. You'll still configure things if you have the GUI. You'll still configure things through administrative tools, right? Mm-hmm. So if I add DHCP as a role. So you need to be aware of that. Now, PowerShell is cool because it lets you figure things out in terms of the basic commands, mm-hmm. which /? Is supposed to be an argument that gives you
a list.
What is it? It's not /? What is it?
Isn't it /help or something like that?
That's it. I'm still kind of in command prompt mode. /8 maybe. I know that / will give you a command's additional information. So if we use the get process /?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the book again. It's like I know I've seen it. It lists all the main commands, the basic commands.
Yeah. Anyways, like I said, I don't use PowerShell much.
Maybe it's /all.
You might be right. Again, PowerShell is such a deviation from commands in Windows from what I'm used to. So think DOS has been the same since DOS, right? So when you talk about command prompt, all of those commands have not changed since the days of DOS. It's been basically the same. PowerShell was a complete diversion from that. It's far more like Linux than it is like Windows or like Unix. It's turned Windows into a command line based operating system where it never was. Where, DOS was a command line based operating system, but again, it was basic. And Windows was not. It was a deviation from that. They said, we're abandoning command line based operating systems. We're going all GUI. They went all in on GUI. And eventually it kind of came full circle and they said, all right, we need to develop something for the guys who like using command line systems. And so that's where they developed PowerShell. So I'm, my familiarity with Windows commands, it's command prompt, So here's what I've used in my experience. So when you type /? Oops, just ? What is it? Or if you type a command and then an argument, it's going to give you the help file for that. Okay.
Yep.
So for instance, I type ping /? You get the commands, all of the various arguments for ping. Okay. And so PowerShell doesn't have that. They've kind of deviated from that.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess there are some things where that works, but those are going to be the Windows commands because they still have incorporated all of the original DOS commands into PowerShell, but they've added so much to it. It's expanded beyond what it ever was when you're talking about command prompt and stuff. So familiarize yourselves with it. I would highly encourage that. I'm gonna take some time and try and familiarize myself with it so I can, you know, maybe give you guys some extra pointers on it. But I would encourage you go through the lab, do the lab. You're gonna have to do it anyway because there's a screenshot required on this one. So.
All right, I have 3 questions.
Great.
First question: when we're doing the book, is it smarter to read the entire chapter and go back and do the activities, or do the activities as we reach it in the book, in the chapters?
I would do the hands-on activities probably first, and then go back and read the material, because the hands-on activities are going to be what you want to focus on when you're doing your reading.
So you're going to read, and it comes to an activity, you know, the first activity. Are you going to stop and go and do the activity and then come back to the book and continue into the chapter? Or do you want to read the entire chapter, go back and do the activities?
I guess that's kind of up to you. I think it's better to do the activities first, while then you know what you're really focusing on in your reading.
Yeah, okay. That's what okay.
You know what I mean? Because that's the stuff that you really need to take away from this class more than anything else. Because this book contains a lot that we don't cover. In terms of the actual important stuff. So we cover it in terms of the review questions, but again, those are open book on purpose. We don't really cover it in terms of the labs, because the labs are what you really want to focus on learning. Okay. You want to take away some practical skills from here, you know, and that's where the labs focus, is the practical stuff that you need to have when you leave this class. Got it. Okay. And so if you do the labs and then go through and read the chapter, you'll know where to focus your reading. Okay. Okay.
So you're saying do the labs first and then read the chapter, or read the chapter and do the labs as they come up in your reading?
I would do the labs first, then read the chapter. If it were me, you can do it however you want, but that's how I would do it if I were you.
Okay.
Okay.
Second question, activity 2.6, installing the server. I didn't do it because it required the DVD at certain points, but you said in the video that you could help someone if they wanted to attempt that.
Yeah.
How would you go about that?
Well, you can download a copy of this. Okay, so if you go to the college, not the college website, but our department website, yccnt.org, it gives you an option, DreamSpark. They don't call it that anymore. They call it Microsoft Azure, I believe.
ycnt.org. Got it.
You can sign up for an account here, and Greg will usually confirm your account within about 20 minutes. He's the one who confirms these accounts. But once you've confirmed, you can download a copy of Windows Server 2016. It's an ISO file, so you'll have to make a DVD or a flash drive out of it. But I can help you do that. Okay. But the first thing you need to do is download that. Now, if this turns out to be something that ends up being way more of a headache than you're willing to go through.
Well, I just want to go through the process and just do it once. I'm sure wherever you go, it's already going to be installed, and the only time you'll deal with it is if you're going to upgrade to the next one. But I was just curious. I mean, I read through the lab. I didn't do it, but I read through it, so I was kind of interested.
Right.
But that's about it. Yeah.
Well,
I was just curious. I don't think there's a lot of administrators that probably have installed it unless their company expanded and bought a new server.
Well, I've done it many times, but I'm also a consultant, not really an administrator. So
okay,
it's fairly simple. I think it's a good plan to do it. So I definitely don't want to discourage that.
Okay.
Let's see if I can find.
And the second thing is, I heard that someone told me that there was a lot of free software to students from the college. Where would you go to?
Yeah, this is where you would get
This is it? Okay.
I'm trying to find where Windows Server is. I'm not seeing a Windows Server on here.
So all of these categories, most popular, new deals, all this stuff, that each one has like a ton of software to review and see if you want it put on your computer.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know where Windows Server is listed in here. I'm having a little trouble finding it. Normally you can search for it.
And you said that some people have practice installing a client VM?
Yes.
Okay, so basically you're putting a virtual machine on your home computer.
Yep. So you'll do the same thing here. You'll come here. You'll go to VMware Web Store for CNT students. Click on that. You'll sign up for an account, and then you can download VMware for your computer. So
how do you know which one to do?
I would use VMware Workstation 15. This one right here. And then that'll allow you to actually install your server locally. Let's see. I don't know where Windows Server is. They used to have it up here, but maybe they've taken it down. In any event, I can get you a copy of it. You might have to come into the college for that. Do you have a laptop or a desktop, Kurt?
I have a pretty robust laptop. 1 terabyte, 8 gigs RAM, 64-bit operating system, Windows 8.1.
Your best bet then would be to visit me during my office hours at the college, if you can. If you really want to do this stuff, I recommend it. Again, I don't want to discourage you, but that might really help you, because then I can sit down with you. I can show you how to, get this software. And if, for instance, if we can't find it on their website, which normally it would be right here on the home page, which I'm not seeing it. So if we can't find it, then I can give you a copy that's on a CD.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
Eventually, I'm looking at buying a tower where I can build a ton of RAM and to support a huge operating system with a couple drives, disk drives, everything.
Yeah, do like a RAID array or something.
Yeah, that's why I'm taking these classes, because I'm going to be building my own computer here shortly.
Well, you should take CNT110. That's one that I teach. Have you taken that already?
I don't think so. Not yet. Is that the CompTIA?
Yeah, the CompTIA A+.
That's the one I'm saving for this fall.
Okay, cool. So yeah, definitely it's a good idea to wait till the fall, because the fall we're introducing a brand new curriculum, which covers Windows 10, which right now the Windows 10 coverage in the class is pretty limited. But
I bought these packages, at the stores or online, but I really want to try and build my own computer.
Well, this class is really good for that, because it has you build one, so you could try it out on somebody else's equipment, and then go buy your own.
All right.
Okay, so CNT110 is a really good class to take if you've never done it before.
Yeah, that's for this fall.
Okay, cool.
And that wraps up one of the certificates.
Yep. You don't get the certificate just for taking the class, unfortunately, but you get the college certificate because you've taken 100, 115, 120 now, and then 110.
Yeah, so and then you take the test for the big certificate.
Yes, the A+ industry certification.
Yes,
is a test. Yeah.
Yeah,
you'll be qualified for the Yavapai College Computer Networking Technician Certificate.
Yes.
After those 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, you said you had 3 questions. What were your other ones?
Well, you already answered 1, 2, and 3. I just have one more comment.
Okay.
That picture that you have with the baseball cap and the sunglasses, that doesn't even look like you. I mean,
yeah, it's an old picture.
It looks like your teenage son.
I think I was probably 19 in that picture, so it's kind of old.
Take an updated one, because you look a lot more professional now than that picture.
And you mentioned it. I've been thinking I need to do that, because it's on I've been using that YouTube channel for all my classes. I better do something a little bit more professional.
Because I happen to know that in Neil Mitchell's class earlier, a couple computer guys came to visit him, and they were joking about that picture.
That's funny.
You need to get rid of it.
All right, I will.
All right.
It is an old picture. I was 19 in that picture. What can I say?
How do I find out what your hours are at campus so that I can try and figure out?
I'm on campus. I'm definitely on from 4:30 to 5:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes I get there a little early. Like 3:30 or so, but that's not guaranteed. So I'm always there 4:30 to 5:30 though on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can work my schedule out to stop in sometime. Maybe I'll even send you an email so that you'll expect me.
Awesome. That's even better. Yeah. If you set an appointment, then I know, okay, I better make sure that I'm there with an operating system for you and everything else that you need. So
Okay.
yeah, if you shoot me an email, that helps too.
All right. All right.
All right.
Am I the only one that's attending these?
Yeah, you have been, but hopefully everybody's watching them. If
Yeah,
not,
they
whatever.
better be.
If not,
Okay.
whatever. I don't care. People do
All
what
right.
they want. It's an online class, so I'm not making it mandatory.
Well, it's helpful. I mean,
Hopefully.
the videos you made outside of the actual 5:30 the Zoom meeting have been helpful as well. I mean, these side videos have been helpful as well.
Good. I'm glad you're watching and enjoying and getting something out of it. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting.
Okay.
I'll see you maybe this week on Tuesday or Thursday, maybe next Monday, whenever.
We'll see. Yep.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Kurt. See you.
Okay.